But that heartbeat that comes from the blues, dun, 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 that's our drum beat. That's what the blues is. It's the heartbeat of Mother Earth. So when our musicians, our contemporary musicians, in Manitoba here, you've got the wonderful Billy Joe Green, Slide and Clyde Roulette, just a couple of examples of awesome blues musicians we have. They play it with a different heart and soul. All our native blues musicians, that's where that comes from. That's from our own drum beat. So it's a theory we're throwing out there. It's one I've been able to explore, and it's becoming my life's work. I also produced a radio documentary series on Aboriginal music. It was 3 1-hours, and the second hour was on Res Blues, on native blues and this influence on the blues. And it eventually, the blues has always been something I've done for passion. We've never made any money at it, but we love what we do. And I also worked in radio, community radio in my community of 6 Nations. We have CKRZ 100.3 FM, and I got involved with them in the early days and got that station off the ground and got doing a radio show on the insistence of Gary Farmer. And from there, I went from a 15-minute show live to eventually a 2-hour show every Sunday for 8 years. And I volunteered willingly to do that. So you can see the threads of the way music has played in my career, but I've always been quite content to be behind the scenes. And now, on a wider basis, for all of Aboriginal performing arts, that's one thing we really do need. We need more people behind the scenes. If you're good at sewing, we need costume designers. If you're good at digital art, we need animators. We need set and costume designers. I said that already. Lighting and set designers as well, if you're a fabulous artist. We need more of our artists in these jobs behind the scene. Our caterers as well, you know, for film locations. And this whole industry can be something we can do on our own. And I know of different nations, particularly in southern Alberta, where they've been able to have a number of huge films, like big Hollywood productions, Legends of the Fall, for one example. And they've been able to start their own film office right in the community to help these big production companies find locations on their reserves to shoot these movies. So that's, like, in a nutshell, like, just the amount of work that has to be done. As I mentioned, when I was in school, I always would do these jobs behind the scenes to hire native artists for our dances and everything. And then when I left university, I went back home to Ontario. I worked with the Union of Ontario Indians and then the Assembly of First Nations, the same thing. I would always, they'd ask for a volunteer to organize the golf tournament. I'll do that. Who wants to organize the Christmas party? I'll do that. So all through my career, I got to meet a number of different native performing artists from back to 1980s. And stayed friends with all of them, and we've got a wonderful, wonderful movement happening now. And from my work in community radio, I got to meet a lot of people at CBC Radio in Toronto. And they were doing the world music programs, and the one woman, Anne McKeegan at CBC Radio, asked me if I'd be willing to be a judge for the Juno Awards. And I went, okay, sure, I'll do that. And she says, you don't get paid any money. I said, well, I know that. You don't get paid very much money in this business. But anyway, so I put my name forth, and next thing I know, I was a judge for the Junos, and it was for the then World Beat recording category. And at that time, native music was listed under World Beat. So when you're a judge for the Junos, you can't change the criteria. You can't even say you're a judge. You're sworn to secrecy. You sign a paper. It says you won't tell anyone you're a judge. But you get all this great music. You get to sit in your living room and decide what you like and what you think best reflects the category. And so after that, first being a judge, after that was done, Anne McKeegan called me again. She goes, would you be interested in being on our committee? And I went, sure. So I went to the first meeting and at the Canadian Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences. And sitting beside me was Daisy Fall, who was the executive director at the time. And I was sitting there, we're reanalyzing the criteria for this category, and I was feeling really frustrated. At the time, Cashton had just done their first release, and they were nominated in the category, and I said, but Native music is not world beat music. We have our own distinct sound. If it's traditional, contemporary, I said, our music is definitely not world beat. So Daisy Fall leans over and says, well, why don't you start a category? And I laughed my head off, and I went, yeah, right, start a category at the Junos. And then she told me what I had to do. I had to document 15 recordings that happened in the past year of Native music, with 15 recordings in the coming year. She goes, and we'll put you on the agenda for the Board of Directors meeting, and you tell us you want an Aboriginal recording category. And I went, alrighty, I can do that. And just, again, because I was in radio all those years, I knew who was making the music. So with Shingoose, Curtis Johnny, also being in Toronto, I spoke to him about this. I said, would you help me? I said, you're a veteran of the Aboriginal music scene. Help me, let's document these numbers. And so we got together and started working on it. And then the day before we go in to do our meeting, I get a phone call from Buffy St. Marie. And I was like flipping out. I'm like, no way, this is really you? Is it really you? Anyway, she invited us to her hotel that night and said, can I be part of your meeting? I want to help support you. And, we'll do a strategy meeting at my hotel. I said, sure, and I called Goose. I said, Buffy wants us to meet her at her hotel, and she's going to have dinner we're going to have dinner together. And so I took all my Buffy St. Marie albums with me, first of all. I became a fan. Like, I was so excited to see her. I just said, okay, before we start this business, I said, I'm a really, really big fan. Can you please sign my albums? And she sat there and signed all my albums, so that was really a big, big thrill, one of the highlights for me. And and then we started talking strategy. And I said, strategy or not? I said, Buffy, you're the first person to walk into that boardroom tomorrow. To me, that's strategy enough to have her lead us in. And she had drafted a beautiful, beautiful essay on the state of Aboriginal music at that time, comparing it to what was happening with African American musicians in the 30s and 40s, just finally going into the studio and finding their own voices. So it was just very beautiful and poignant. We had 20 minutes to do our presentation. After that, we were nicely kicked out of the boardroom and sat in another room for about another maybe 20 minutes. And then they brought us back in. I said, okay, you guys got the category. And we're ecstatic, we're jumping around. And they said, but you can't tell anyone for 2 months till we have our press conference. So we had a gag order for 2 months, and that was pretty hard to keep inside, but we did until it was officially announced. And that year at the Junos, both Buffy St. Marie and Robbie Robertson from the band, who was also from my community of Six Nations, were out there at the Junos in 1994 announcing we have the Aboriginal recording category. I volunteered, here we go again, the keyword, volunteered, for the Juno Awards for the next 15 years. I was the first chairperson of the Aboriginal category, and then we had Shingoose was our second chair of that category. And then eventually, just in the last few years, I was asked to be on the board of directors for the Juno Awards and Keras. So all my years of volunteering were starting to finally pay off. So I served 1 term on the board, and I was the first Aboriginal person on the board. So my whole career has been about opening doors for our people, for our artists to get in the door. Where I've seen a door closed, where access wasn't possible, just go and knock and just say, excuse us, we need to get in here. So that's kind of where my career has been at, totally behind the scenes. And my latest, just getting into radio is just really, really, television. I went from radio to television. In a bit of a segue, was asked to do the publicity for Buffalo Tracks on APTN a few years ago.